And Edward was kind enough to invite me to come and speak to you all today. So I do a lot of outreach as part of my work with NC State. And I get invited to go to places like Wake County or Durham County or Chatham County, but I have never gotten an invite to Bertie County. So when Edward emailed me a little while back and said, would you come out here? I said, well, yeah, absolutely. It's exciting to travel a little bit and get outside of where I normally am and to come and bring a program to you all, because you maybe don't have a lot of therapeutic horticulturists out this way, but you could. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So a little bit about me. I'm Amy Bruzacchese. I'm based at NC State, but my home is in Alamance County, which is about an hour on the other side of Raleigh. So it's right between Durham and Greensboro, right off the interstate. And I live in a very small town named Graham. If you've ever heard of Graham before, if you've been driving out 4085, it's got a few of the exits before you get to Burlington. So that's where I am. And I am a 2022 Alamance County Master Gardener. So I'm one of you all as well. And it's a really nice program. There's about 60 of us there, and we have a bunch of different programs. We don't have therapeutic horticulture in Alamance County yet, so I'm working on it. But we have it in a number of other counties, including Wake and Chatham and Buncombe. So I support, as part of my work, I support the programs that are in those counties, and I'm a resource for the agents in all 100 counties. So it's a pleasure to be here. I heard from some of you all that you've come from other places. I grew up in Northern Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C. So I had the privilege of going to some really beautiful gardens growing up. My dad was a landscape architect, and my mother was a mental health therapist. So if you sort of put those two together, you might get something like therapeutic horticulture if you kind of look at it sideways. So it's not a huge surprise that I ended up doing this. The letters after my name, MSW, I've had a 30-year career in social work where I've always used plants as part of my practice. And just a few years ago, I formalized that by getting my HTR, which is the other letters, and that's a registration in horticultural therapy. And we'll talk a little bit about that because that's a different word than therapeutic horticulture. It's a slightly different practice, but I have that as part of my background. So I was really pleased to get the work at NC State to be the subject matter specialist for the state. And when I took that position, I didn't realize I was the only one in the country. So North Carolina is number one with that. And one of my jobs this summer is to contact the other 49 states and see if they're doing anything in therapeutic horticulture at the extension level, because I kind of think they should. It's a lot of fun. And I think there's a lot of scope for master gardeners to do this work. So let's talk about it. So what we're going to do today is we'll learn about what this is, a little bit about the history and science of therapeutic horticulture, how it works, where it works, and how you can get involved if you're interested. If this piques your interest, we have ways to get you involved. So AHTA is the professional organization, American Horticultural Therapy Association. It covers therapeutic horticulture and hort therapy. And we'll tease out the difference there. So therapeutic horticulture is a process where participants enhance their well-being through active or passive involvement with plants. It's less likely to be in a clinical setting. So we could go right out here, right out in your beautiful area here, and do a therapeutic horticulture group or an activity. We could do it right here in the room if we wanted to. It doesn't need to be in a clinical setting. We don't need to necessarily make medical notes about what happened with each person. We don't have to sit down with a care team and set goals and try to meet those goals in therapeutic horticulture. So think of it as the big umbrella or the big table that includes all these different therapies that involve people and plants. So horticultural therapy are the people down at the clinical end of the table. And that's those letters after my name. So I have the registration and the training to do that as well. And that's working with other clinicians. So it could be in a hospital setting. It could be in a long-term care setting where I work with speech, physical, occupational therapists to deliver horticultural therapy. And sometimes we're working on the exact same thing. So we might be working on standing strength for somebody that's had a stroke or had an injury, or we might be working on finger tracking for somebody that's trying to improve that. We might be working on improving or maintaining cognitive awareness for somebody that has a cognitive deficit. So that sounds more clinical because it is, but we can still go outside and do it, and we often do. But it's an established treatment plan, and but that's not what I do at NC State. We're not doing the clinical piece there. So I can use that information if I need it, but to be honest, therapeutic horticulture is a lot more fun. So we had a little bit of conversation about this before we got started, but I've had these questions before about trying to figure out what is it that you do? What is this? So it's not herbal medicine. I'm not prescribing herbs to treat or cure anything, although I think that just being around plants can be very healing for people. We're not looking at what specific plants do for people's health. We're not trying to heal illnesses. We're not growing controlled substances. That might sound like a euphemism. Therapeutic horticulture, what is she growing? It's stuff like this. I'll occasionally get emails or phone calls with people that have plants that are not doing well, and they think that I can provide therapy for the plant. I think that's really sweet. I do have horticulture science training, so I can often be helpful to them, but it's not therapeutic horticulture. So, but it's nice to be able to offer some assistance, but it's not quite what I do there. It's not the same as just gardening together. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And it's not a multi-level marketing scheme. Sometimes people think I'm trying to sell them, like herbal medicine or something. I'm like, no, I'm not trying to sell you. There's nothing for sale here. So, wondering where this came from. If you've not heard of this before, it's probably good to go back and get a little bit of the history of this profession and this way of managing some of the issues that people might come to us with. So as far back as 2,000 years ago, we have records that show that gardens were planted in Mesopotamia, which is the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East. So it would be like where Syria and Iran are right now. We know that they were planted because we have the writings that say they were a respite for people that were suffering from stress or from illness. They were put in the garden or taken to the garden or spent time in the garden to help them feel better. And hopefully it worked. Ancient Persia, this is one of my favorite things to talk about. This is a paradise garden in the picture there. And paradise, the word paradise just means surrounded by a wall. That's what the word means. The pared is a wall. So these were sensory gardens. So if you can think of a desert, like a desert community not being maybe the place you would think of for a garden, it took a lot of effort to put the paradise garden in and to maintain it. So with a great deal of effort, families put these paradise gardens in, and they were very prescribed. So they had to have these 4 quadrants, and each quadrant meant something specific. But they offered fragrance, they offered color, because if you can think of the rippling sand, if you've been out to the beach here, you can sort of think it's kind of like that without much relief, not a lot of green. So you can come into this little walled garden and have color and fragrance, and in the center would be a water feature. It would either be still or flowing water, and it was all very symbolic. But it also offered cooler temperatures and a refuge for people and their pets and their animals to just get away from the heat for a little bit. So moving forward in time, by 1100 AD, we had writings, and we still have those writings, from St. Bernard prescribing a walk in the garden to ease anxiety and sadness. So in those times, and in modern times too, monasteries were a place where people could get sanctuary. So if they were being, bothered for political reasons or had sickness or illness, they would go to monks. We didn't have a healthcare system, and maybe we still don't, but they really didn't have anything back then. So monasteries opened their doors to travelers and to people seeking refuge. And St. Bernard was sort of an early form of a physician. And he would prescribe people to take a walk in the garden because it would help. It would just help them improve their perspective and their outlook on life. And in those gardens, they were growing herbs that they knew would be of some assistance. And some of those herbs were the progenitors to the medicines that we take today. So they knew at that time that willow bark would help as a pain medicine. That's salicylic acid, which is aspirin. So people were really onto something even back in those days. And they lived close to plants and close to nature, and they kind of knew what they were doing. So they would have these physic gardens, and there are still places in Europe where you can go and see the original physic gardens. They've been tended through time, and they're well labeled, and they're not necessarily used to treat people anymore, but they're still very healing in a way that is a calming and restorative setting. So moving forward in time again, we're in 1798. The United States is pretty new, and this is one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. And he's kind of a Renaissance man, even though it's well past the Renaissance by 1798. He's a physician in Pennsylvania, and he one of the founders of the University of Pennsylvania. And one of his many jobs, besides signing the Declaration of Independence, being a statesman for Pennsylvania and treating patients, is he was the keeper of what they called then the insane asylum. We'd call it a mental health hospital today, but in his writings, it's an asylum. And it wasn't a very nice place. As you probably, if you've read anything about mental health history, people were put into what basically were like prisons if they were not, if they had emotional issues or mental health issues at the time. And it's to get them out of sight, out of mind, I guess. But in those places, if the family were able to pay for their care, they didn't have to do any work. If the family was not able to pay for their care, they would have to go outside and help tend the gardens, chop wood, whatever was needed to take care and sort of pay their way through by working. And what Dr. Rush noticed with these, he had a pretty large sample population if you were running an experiment. He noticed that the people that had to go out and work outside were doing much better. He said digging in the soil seemed to have a curative effect. So these people who came in with what would be very recognizable mental illnesses were getting better because they were having to work outside. So it was using their bodies, it was using their minds to solve problems. It was just being in the soil and being together, working together outside that seemed to have a curative effect, where their rich peers were inside not doing any better at all. So go figure. But the lights were starting to come on for therapeutic horticulture. So after World War I and World War II, there was an influx of injured veterans that came into the they're not the VA hospitals at that time, but what became the VA hospitals. And one of the ways of helping these young men get better, and they were young men at the time, were to take them out into the garden and offer vocational care and help them learn horticulture skills that would possibly lead to work, because some of them were missing limbs, missing eyes, things like that from their war injuries. So they found that gardening and agriculture work was something that was still possible for a lot of them. So they found that it didn't just teach them vocational skills, it really helped them cope with the changes that they were having to go back to in their lives. And it was they were using gardening as a basis for teaching them how to button their shirts and how to get up off the ground if they were missing a limb. And it was in a natural setting. So instead of being in kind of a cold clinic and in a place that was, reminding them that things were not the same, they were out in a familiar setting. A lot of them had come from rural areas. So they were learning to be able to go back to their family farms or to work in agriculture as a way of having a meaningful life going forward. So it gave people a lot of hope. And then during both wars, victory gardens on the home front helped families stay connected and feel like, growing food is a way to regain a little bit of control when the world is kind of spinning out of control. You can at least get a tomato to ripen, right? So it was a way for them to feel like they could still feed their families. So all good things. Then our definition came from AHTA, American Hort Therapy Association. That was founded in the 1970s. But prior to that, from about the end of World War II up until then, garden clubs were providing similar services in communities. So they were going out and doing what we would now recognize as therapeutic horticulture. Even without formal training, they figured it out. So by formalizing that and turning into a professional organization, they were able to make that training formal, because there's a set of skills that are really helpful to know before you take it out into the community. And universities began to offer advanced training and courses. And many of those are still going today, 50 years later. So that's the history. So that takes us up to now. But you might be wondering, what's the science behind it? Why does this work? It is an evidence-based practice. Everything that we do is backed by the science, by the research. So we're not just, sitting in offices thinking what would be fun to do today. We do think of that, but then we try and find the science to back it up and make sure that we're tailoring it to the populations that we're working with. But we wanted to, in the 20th century, we started to really formalize the research to understand how these techniques are helping people. We know that they're helping. We all know we feel better when we go outside and get our hands dirty, but we wanted to know why. So there's some theories that support why this works. And everybody can tell, there's constant research going on that continues to test and prove these theories. So here we have Rachel and Stephen Kaplan. They started at the 1970s as a teaching professorial couple at the University of Michigan. And the work that they did led to the attention restoration theory. And I don't see anybody falling asleep in here, so I can't have that part of my talk, which is good. I'm glad you're not asleep. But if you were, we can talk about the different kinds of attention. So what you are giving me right now is voluntary or directed attention. It's directed by your thought and your concentration. You're listening to my voice, you're looking at me and my slides, and you're paying attention. And that's directed attention, and you only have so much of that before we get tired. We've all been to school, and we all know that there's a point, right, in a lecture where you're just done, and the teacher might not be. And it takes all you've got to stay concentrated and stay focused, and that's because your directed or your voluntary attention is, your brain is just done. And you have to put in twice as much effort to just stay focused on what's happening. So the Kaplans were professors in the 70s, and they saw that in their classrooms. They said, well, we can go for only this long, and then we just start losing them. So what's going on there? What's happening there? So that's where they came up with the theory. You get fatigued. Your brain gets fatigued. You can't remember the information. It's just not as valuable as it was in the first few minutes when you started. So a lot of professors use this theory, not outside of therapeutic horticulture, to put the most important points at the beginning of their lectures and then talk about them. So at least people get the point, and then the meat comes later. But involuntary attention, this is where their research got really interesting. When they took their students outside and said, we're not going to talk about that anymore, just walk around in the courtyard, notice something, come back and we'll talk about what you noticed. So some students would say, I noticed a bee on the flower, or I noticed that that vine is in bloom and it wasn't last week when I was here for class. Or somebody would say, I noticed an airplane going over, or a helicopter going over. Okay, well those are involuntary. Those are things that catch your attention. You're not going out there to look at that. It just sort of catches your eye or your ear or one of your senses while you're outside. And that's involuntary attention. That's like hitting the reset button for your brain. And that's what the outdoors does for us. They had a really hard time identifying indoor things that would be as effective as outdoor for getting the involuntary attention reset. So their theory, and they've tested it many times, and lots of other researchers have tested it, They've figured out that nature assists in us recovering our ability to direct our attention again.
Say, go hug a tree.
Yeah, go hug a tree. Go hug a tree, or pick up some leaves, or sniff something, but let nature restore you. So, and it didn't take very long. They would say a 5 or 10 minute rest. So they would start breaking their lectures into a couple of pieces and say, you can have a break, but you have to go outside and come back when you're done. So, and it worked, and grades went up, and people were happier. So here's another one of our theorists. This is E.O. Wilson. He passed away a couple of years ago after an amazing career as a biologist and a researcher, and a really incredible person. His book and his theory are called biophilia. And we have a researcher at NC State whose whole career is studying biophilia. And all that means is it's just our instinctive bond between living systems as humans. So it can be people who love horses, or people who love plants and can't stop collecting and taking care of plants. That's biophilia. We're hardwired for that. It's supposed to be that way. And you may have a different aspect of nature that you relate to. If you love dogs or love cats or love turtles, that's biophilia too. In our context, we talk about plants, but biophilia encompasses the whole natural world. So some people get their reset by going and spending time at the beach and just being with the calm of, I don't know if the ocean is always calm, but in their mind sometimes that's, that it's just being in nature that way. So that's biophilia. We are hardwired to reach out to nature just as part of our biology. Then another scientist is Dr. Roger Ulrich, and he did what sounded like a really tedious study and found something really interesting. So he ended up having access to 10 years of medical records. He didn't know these patients, he didn't treat these patients, but he had access to the records of a hospital that did many, many hundreds of gallbladder surgeries over a 10-year period. It was something that this would have been in the 80s, the early 80s, and gallbladder surgery now is just almost like the McDonald's drive-through. But at that time, it was an inpatient procedure, and the hospital that he did his work at was considered the gold standard before they did the keyhole surgery. So people would stay in the hospital for a few days to about a week, getting better before they were released to go home. And nowadays it's not that big of a deal. But at the time, there was a lot of pain associated with gallbladder surgery. It was considered major abdominal surgery. And people would stay in this hospital on a corridor, and were being taken care of by the nurses, of course. But one side of the hospital faced another brick building that was part of the hospital complex, and the other side faced a rolling green field. So think of your beautiful landscape around here. And they were able to see out into a green field. They couldn't go there. It was still in the, if you go to the hospital now and have surgery, they get you up as soon as the anesthesia wears off. But at that time, they would still let you stay in bed and relax for a few days. So the folks that had the view of the bricks were more likely to request pain control, more likely to complain to their nurses, and had an average of, I think it was 2 days longer in the hospital with some minor complications to major complications. Whereas the people who were on the green side of the hospital needed less pain medications, they weren't bothering their nurses, but they didn't need as much from their nurses, and they got out of the hospital sooner. That was the only variable. They were getting the same care otherwise. So his hypothesis was just having that open view just help clear their minds and give them a better outlook while they were there in the hospital, and help their bodies heal faster and have less pain. So nowadays, this research has been, it caught like wildfire when it came out, and they replicated it in other places, because that's important that it's not just one study. But what they found out was even a picture of nature can be helpful. It's why we send people flowers and plants in the hospital if they're allowed to have them, because just having that little bit of nature in that really kind of cold, sterile clinical setting can make a big difference. So if you want to think about it like a portable herb garden, that's a nice thing to bring if you're visiting somebody in the hospital. So this is one of my favorite little tidbits to talk about. This physician, O'Brien, was a lung cancer, an oncologist, and he had a theory that this Mycobacterium vaccae, which was present in the soil, would help his lung cancer patients shrink their tumors. There had been some preliminary research that indicated that it might be helpful to them. So he got samples of soil from different places, made sure that it had plenty of this mycobacterium in it, which is it's just a fungus that grows in the native soil. You can't see it, you can't smell it, but it's there. So the bad news for the lung cancer patients is it didn't really fix or cure their lung cancer, but what they reported was having an emotional lift. They felt hope, they felt better. They just felt better than the patients that did not get treatment, where they were able to, what amounted to playing in the dirt. That's what he had them do in this study. He had them repot some plants to get, to breathe in, to release the mycobacterium and breathe the air and, really get it in there. And then he measured to make sure that it went into their lungs and that, that it was there. And their depression, their anxiety about their diagnosis, the stress of being a lung cancer patient in a time when it was really a lot more difficult to treat than it is now. What they found was the therapeutic horticulture helped the patients to manage their stress. And a lot of studies since have found that this compound in the soil is similar to the compounds in some antidepressants that are prescribed. So who knew? So it's in all the native soil, so if you go back buy a bag of sterile soil at the garden center, it's not in there. That soil's been cooked and sterilized, and for some people that's really important to not have extra stuff that they're breathing in. But for the rest of us, get dirty, get your hands dirty. You're releasing these mycobacteria and helping your mood improve. So it's a good thing. So we have lots and lots of peer-reviewed science that backs up what we're doing. And some of our journals, the Journal of Therapeutic Horticulture is the one that AHTA publishes, and now that I've been in this for a while, I know most of the people that are publishing in there, so that's kind of fun to see what my friends have been doing. Acta Horticulturae that's going to be more horticultural science, but our stuff shows up in there too. Same with Hort Technology. And lots of the discipline-specific journals. So I'm a social worker, so I'm always interested in how the social sciences can benefit from therapeutic horticulture. I have a really good friend who's an occupational therapist, and he always checks to see what the OTs are doing with therapeutic horticulture, because you can only stack so many piles of blocks with kids before they want to go out and do something else, and they can accomplish the same thing out in the garden and not get bored. So it's a good thing. So who benefits from this practice? The short answer is pretty much everybody, but people who are experiencing traumas due to disability, health status changes, cognitive impairment, they can all benefit from therapeutic horticulture. I've noticed people who are in any kind of a confined living situation, so people who are in extended care, in assisted living, people who are incarcerated, people who can't get out without a lot of help, without a lot of operational help to get out, can really benefit from even an indoor program doing therapeutic horticulture, and I have pictures of that. So it's offered all over in medical facilities, rehab centers, vocational settings, day health, public gardens, schools, businesses, lots of different places. And one of the things that we always tell our participants is nature does not hurry, but everything is accomplished. So you may not get where you want to go during this session, but maybe a month from now you'll be further along. So patience is really important with gardening and with therapeutic horticulture. So we talked a little bit at the very beginning about what therapeutic horticulture is not. And was anybody on the Plants, Pests, and Pathogens webinar? It was about a week ago, for Master Gardeners, you've probably seen this slide already. My talk for the state, for the Master Gardeners for the state was, is this a garden activity or is it therapeutic horticulture? They can look very much the same. If we put a therapeutic horticulture group and a garden group next door to each other, they might look really similar, but there's something very different going on. So we'll talk about that. For a garden activity, it's of course very important that you have horticultural knowledge. We want to know what we're doing with the plants and what we're trying to accomplish with the plants, right? With a therapeutic horticulture session, we need that garden knowledge, but we also need human services and therapeutic training so that we are working with the people. In a garden activity, the plants are the focus. We want to get our list accomplished with what we're trying to get done with the plants. But in a therapeutic horticulture session, the plants, what our list is for the plants may not get finished during that session because the people are the focus. We're trying to help people get closer to what their goals are. So we might think we're going to try to get all of these tomatoes planted out today, or we're going to we're going to take these flowers off and press the flowers and make flower cards in a couple of weeks when they're dry. That may or may not happen. What we're trying to do is focus on what the people need. So even if we just get a few flowers pulled off or a few tomatoes planted, that's good. That's progress. So we have to keep the people in mind. For a garden activity, you don't necessarily need to do an evaluation on people coming to a garden activity. You might want to know if they have the ability to work in the garden, if they need adaptive tools, let's say, or if it's a hot day and you think they might need extra water, that's a good thing. So we're not ignoring the people. But in a therapeutic horticulture session, it's really important to evaluate what people's needs are so that you can plan the session and make sure that what you're planning is going to get them closer to whatever their goals are. And like we said, the end product for a garden group is the garden. It's the plants, it's the vegetables you're trying to grow, or the flowers that you're trying to get looking prettier than when you first got them. And the end product in a TH session is the person making some progress toward their goal. They may not get all the way there, but they'll be a little bit further than when they started, and that's the point. And what I always say, I don't know if I put that slide in here, but therapeutic horticulture doesn't necessarily fix your problems. It doesn't necessarily cure what's wrong with you, but it makes you better so that when you go back to your problems, you have a better frame of mind. And that's what we accomplish in our sessions. So Master Gardeners can help fill a gap in places where there aren't not enough or are no professional therapeutic horticulturists to work with different groups. And that's where we found, at least here in North Carolina, that Master Gardeners have been incredibly helpful. The Wake County program goes out to, I believe, this year 11 different sites and provides therapeutic horticulture activities to a number of different populations. And there are not enough therapeutic horticulturists, even in a big county like Wake, to meet the needs of people. So having a group of Master Gardeners that knows what they're doing and is ready to go out and do it, it's wonderful for the community, and it's wonderful for the Master Gardeners too. So this is a little more about their program. They've been around since 2004, and 10 to 12 sites. They have 11 sites right now, and that's about what they can support. When I talked to them last year, they thought, well, we should probably try to go up to 20. And I said, if you can, that's great, but don't push it. You start small and you grow from there. But they've had over 1,500 contacts in some years, which I think is amazing. Those are some of the places that they go right now. They have 170 active Master Gardeners, and it's a massive county with a big population, but about 50 of those 170 are active in the therapeutic horticulture program. So it's very meaningful, and they develop good relationships with the people that they're working with. So they go to see the same people each time, and it develops a really nice friendship between the Master Gardeners and the folks that they're going out to take garden activities to. So you might be wondering, well, if we wanted to do this, how would we get started? How do you start this kind of a thing? You think about who in your community might be able to benefit from therapeutic horticulture. So maybe there's a long-term care facility, or maybe there's a school, or Maybe there's a senior day center that is always looking for groups to come in and bring a little something different than maybe what they've been used to. So you think about where you can hold sessions. There are some facilities where people bring everybody, they'll have a beautiful therapeutic garden down in Wilmington. They have the Ability Garden that is attached to their county extension center. So busloads of kids come and do activities at the Ability Garden. So you could have a facility like that, or you could take tabletop activities into a group who can't get outside easily, and you can start seedlings and pot them into larger containers, and everybody's getting their hands dirty and working with plants, and you didn't even have to go outside. And those plants can be planted somewhere else later on, and you can have a field trip where people can come and see the plants that they took care of during the spring or during the summer. You would think about how often you would want to offer sessions. Some places once a week, that's a lot. Once a month is probably more reasonable. You could start with what I like to call a seed session, it might literally be a seed session, but it's a one-time thing, like to try something on. So you think of something where you could just do like a make and take activity, where you can start seeds or take a stock plant, which is what these are, and take cuttings and teach people how to propagate plants. And then they've all adopted new plants by the end of the session and learned a little bit more about something sensory and something delightful. So you think about how can you contact somebody about setting up an interest meeting? How many volunteers do you need to make a program successful? The Wake County people say that for each site you need at least 4 volunteers, because if somebody's traveling or not feeling well, it's just important to have at least 2 people that are ready and able to go out anytime you're doing an activity. Then you want to get organized. Have a very clear understanding with your host site about times and dates. Always have staff present if you're going into a facility, to make it really clear that that's not break time for the care staff. That it's just a huge liability if you don't know anybody there, you don't know what their particular needs are, but the staff does. So they don't have to do anything. They can just be there, be in the back of the room. But if an emergency arises, you always want to have somebody there that's familiar with the people and can help out. So understand what your budget is for materials. Plan to either split it with the host site. You can hold fundraisers where you propagate and sell plants, and that can be one of the activities that your group does. You set up a volunteer orientation and plan all your sessions ahead, as far ahead as you can. That way you know when you need materials. So if you're thinking of having a harvest dinner at the end of your growing season, you want to make sure you have all those plants in the ground at the beginning of the growing season so you have something to eat at the end of the year. And that's the nature of horticulture, right? Is you have to understand the way that the plants grow so that you're not stuck going to every garden center trying to find what you're looking for. If you could have grown it yourself from seed 6 months ago, it saves a lot of money. And then get educated. Consider a course in therapeutic horticulture to learn the basics, or have at least one person in your group who's had the course who can pass that knowledge along to you. Sort of be a train the trainer type situation. Safety is really, really important in the courses that we have through NC State and the Botanical Garden. To me, that's worth the whole program, is to learn the safety information so that you can go in to any site and just see what the potential hazards might be, or what you would need to bring with you to make sure everybody stays safe. We don't think of gardening typically as an unsafe activity, but with some populations, some of the tools can be accidentally used or even deliberately used as weapons. So we want to make sure that we keep things safe, that we understand if there are safety protocols. For example, one of the memory care units that I've done activities in, you can't have anything sharp of any kind. So no secateurs, no hand pruners, no soil knives, nothing like that. So we had to do everything, with our fingers, and that affected the plant material that we could use. If we couldn't go in and prune, we had to be able to finger prune everything, which was fine. It was just those were the plants that we chose. But knowing that information ahead of time, I didn't go in there with roses, right? That wouldn't have worked out real well at all, because there would be no way to prune them or take care of them. So just having that conversation to understand, are there any restrictions that we need to know about? Anything that we can't do or that we should keep in mind? Really important. Read all the material you can. If you can find some of the books about therapeutic horticulture, I brought some of my favorites with me. Get that knowledge base. There's a lot of good information on YouTube as well, believe it or not. A lot of good information. And if you can find a working plant therapy group, horticultural therapy group, ask if you can visit. Most places are really very kind about having visitors and letting you see how they do the work that they're doing. And I think that's really beneficial to see what a good, solid working group looks like. So you might be wondering, what does this look like? What do these groups look like? So this is, that top picture probably looks familiar. I have the same cart here today and the same little mobile herb garden. So to go into facilities, I would bring all of my stuff with me. In general, most of the facilities that I visit did not have gardening equipment, so I had to bring it with me. That's our little St. Patrick's shamrocks. So actual shamrocks are oxalis, and oxalis is poisonous. Every part of the plant is poisonous. So we got to have that conversation about these are not real shamrocks because we just don't want it. But we did red clover instead. So that still had the 3 leaves, and we talked about 4-leaf clover, so it worked very well. And it's a nitrogen fixer. It's in the legume family, so it's a benefit to the soil for if they wanted to plant it out in the soil later. So we did clover instead of oxalis. And then in the middle there, that's a group of long-term care residents, and we are doing fresh flower wreaths. So they're separating the flowers, and we're going to make wreaths out of them for their doors. They all live in separate little bedrooms with kind of plain doors, so we put fresh flower wreaths. It looked really beautiful. And then the point of the lady on the right is that it's supposed to be fun. So if we get all, we're not doing it right, and this is too difficult, and I can't tie this, and I can't cut this, we're not having fun. So the point that she made was, here are all the materials we were making. It looks like those are bee hotels. So that's bamboo. I cut bamboo into 6 to 8 inch tubes, and then we used water bottles that we cut in half and stuffed the water bottles with bamboo, little they look like pencils, but they're hollow, and put a little bit of, what is it called? Like moss, like sphagnum moss in between to make bee hotels to hang out in their courtyard. And some of the folks were getting frustrated that it was hard to stuff everything in there. And it was meant to be a fine motor skill activity. So it was supposed to be a little bit frustrating. But she decided instead of tying her burlap around the bottle, she was going to wear it. And I said, good, we want to have fun because that's the point. So in the fall, we did leaf printing. So we went out and gathered some of the last of the leaves before they turned crispy and brown. This was right before, I think this was October 29th or 30th, and we really did have our first freeze on the 31st in that area. And so we used paint rollers and paint to do leaf prints, and then we made a big banner out of the leaf prints. In the middle there, the lady with the mask on was a horticulture professor at NC State and lived in a long-term care facility. And she was one of my most avid garden participants. She was there anytime, rain or shine. Even if she wasn't feeling that well, she would make herself go to what we called our garden club, which was our therapeutic horticulture group. So she was out there. Everybody else had gone to lunch. She and the other gentleman across there, and then one of my volunteers, and we finished planting out all of the pansies. And that was right before our first freeze as well. So that was the same week as that. And we wanted to get the fall planting done before it got too cold to be outside. And then we do this year round. So when it's December and January, it can be really unpleasant to be outside in the garden. So we think of things that we can do inside. And we made pinecone bird feeders. So that's peanut butter and bird seed and burlap, and we put bows on it to make it cute. I don't have that in there, but this is one of the participants really doing a beautiful job. And I would always bring an example of whatever we were doing, if it was the tabletop activity, and every single time the folks that I was working with would run circles around me, and I would just put my little example and say, well, I think you all have this. So I was not nearly as creative or good at it. Hers looked so much better than mine, and the birds loved it. So in January and February, we would start seeds. And we would use these little peat pots, and on one side we write our name, and the other side we'd write the name of whatever the seed was that we were trying to grow. And this group that I went and visited in the memory care, sometimes in memory care you're not sure if you're going to get everything planted, and that's okay. As long as everybody has time with the soil and time with the seeds, I can always go back in and put seeds in later if I notice that we don't have germination a week or two later. I always have extra seeds so that I can bring plants back. This group had 100% germination, and I was just like, you all are A+ gardeners, my goodness. Because it can be really difficult in a big group to make sure everybody gets the little seed in the pot. They did it. They did an amazing job. So this was in April of last year. Right around April 20th, it was nice enough to plant out, and I was going to be there anyway. So we spent time in their raised beds putting their plants out, and they had the most beautiful garden last summer. So some resources to just kind of bear in mind. If you go to the if you just go on whatever your search engine is, Google or Safari, and put in North Carolina Cooperative Extension Therapeutic Horticulture, that's me. You can take a picture of the little snap code, and it opens that up on your phone if you want to do it that way. But that's a way that I write articles on there. This talk is featured on there for anybody that was interested, and all the other things that I do, I post on there so that you can keep up with what I'm doing and what we're doing at NC State in therapeutic horticulture. Carolina's Horticultural Therapy Network is our professional organization, but it's for volunteers, for students, for master gardeners, and for professionals. You don't have to have the letters after your name, and in fact, many of us don't. It's a network of people who are interested in this work and want to learn more about this work, and we all learn from each other. So if there's a topic that we want to learn about, we see if anybody in our group knows about it and will give us a talk, or we go. Like this month, we've found somebody at the Missouri Botanical Garden to come and talk to us. So she'll do a Zoom for us next week. And you can attend all of those online talks for free, and you don't even have to be a member. So it's definitely worth looking into if this is something that you're interested in. And then we have the online therapeutic horticulture courses and the certificate. So most of the work that I do at NC State is teaching these 4 courses. So we have Introduction to Therapeutic Horticulture, where we go in way more depth about the history and the science and who benefits and all of that. It's a 6-week online course. And then we just finished the program development, where we learn how to write an activity and learn about safety. In the fall, we're going to get going on special populations, so we go for the entire lifespan, and any type of person and any type of special need that we might be thinking of, we learn how to tailor programs for all those different folks. And then we finish up with program management, and that's where we learn all the nuts and bolts of putting a program together. So we have a number of master gardeners who have gone through either the first course or the whole 4-course series. And it can just be really helpful if you're doing this work to have that knowledge, to have at least one person in your group who's gone through and has that knowledge base, so they can say, oh, wait a minute, have we checked with them to make sure that, that this room is going to be safe, or that garden is safe, or it just gives you a fresh set of eyes for some of the things that need to be considered to have a successful program. And that's how you can find me. That's all my contact information. Edward has that too. So if you lose sight of me, you can check in with Edward. And now, I will be happy to take your questions. Yeah, absolutely.